Suppose I proposed that Donald Trump was not the catalyst of America's democratic unraveling, but rather the byproduct, perhaps even the inevitable outcome, of a meticulously crafted ideological, cultural, and institutional decline. His rise was not an anomaly, but an emergent property of a broader historical arc shaped by systemic forces. This isn't the tale of one administration or even one political party. It's the chronicle of a nation that, for decades, has failed to reconcile its democratic ideals with its embedded contradictions, the exploitation of race as a political strategy, the deliberate dismantling of social infrastructure, and the transformation of mass media into a machinery of fear and performance. It's a narrative punctuated by calculated policies and rhetorical subterfuge, engineered not to unite, but to divide and conquer. I'm Chill Chaz. Across this series, we'll conduct a multidisciplinary investigation into the foundational structures and ideological constructs that have led us to this inflection point. We'll examine the evolution of party realignment after the Civil Rights Act, deconstruct the Southern strategy's enduring legacy, critique the ascendance of neoliberal orthodoxy under Reagan, and analyze how performative populism hijacked political discourse and redefined the boundaries of civic truth. Our aim is to deconstruct how policy and power shape public consciousness and how manufactured narratives amplified by cable news, tech algorithms, and culture wars have distorted historical memory and weaponized collective fear. We will also explore how these dynamics intersect with class stratification, racial capitalism, gender politics, and institutional decay. This inquiry is not a mere intellectual exercise. It's a historiographical imperative and a civic responsibility. To understand where we are, we must rigorously interrogate where we've been and who has benefited at each stage. Only by mapping these genealogies of influence and ideological mutation can we begin to build sustainable strategies for democratic renewal and resistance. Whether you approach this series as a political theorist, an educator, a community organizer, or simply someone reckoning with the fragility of democratic institutions, understand this. We are not engaging in speculative conjecture. This is a grounded in evidence-driven analysis of American political history, informed by scholarship, lived experience, and the voices too often excluded from national narratives. This is not a partisan project. It's a civic intervention, a cultural audit, a refusal to normalize the erosion of truth in the name of power. And as we navigate these episodes from the origins of white backlash politics to the contemporary crisis of algorithmic control, we'll be asking, how do we restore meaning to democracy in a society that treats it as performance? So let us begin, not just at the surface, but at the subterranean root systems, because only by exposing the foundations can we hope to rebuild. This is how we got Trump. A lot of people think Donald Trump came out of nowhere, like he just descended an escalator and shocked the world. But that moment, it was just the final act in a play that started over 50 years ago. Let's go back to 1965. The Civil Rights Act had just passed. It outlawed racial segregation and gave Black Americans new voting protections. It was the result of years of organizing, boycotts, and powerful leadership. Names like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Bayard Rustin, Fannie Lou Hamer, and John Lewis leading marches, getting arrested, and calling out injustice with unstoppable courage. For many, it was a victory, but to others, especially, white political leaders in the South, it felt like a threat to their control. Those leaders didn't shout it from the rooftops. Instead, they got strategic. That's where the Southern strategy came in. Republican strategists used coded language like law and order and states' rights to appeal to white voters uncomfortable with integration without sounding openly racist. It was clever, and it worked. Nixon won elections by promising to clean up the chaos while quietly signaling that he'd keep the old racial order intact. While leaders like Coretta Scott King were still calling for justice, Nixon was building a new coalition rooted in fear of change. Then came Reagan. He built on the strategy. When he talked about welfare queens, he wasn't just criticizing programs. He was painting a picture of lazy, undeserving Black Americans draining the system. It made people angry, and that anger became votes. It was a backlash dressed up as economics. At the same time, Democrats were changing. They were becoming the party of civil rights, of immigrants, of women's rights, of young people, the legacy of leaders like Malcolm X, Ella Baker, and Shirley Chisholm echoed in their messaging. The GOP didn't just see a new coalition. They saw a threat to their traditional voter base. By the early 1990s, the strategy got an upgrade. Enter Newt Gingrich. He didn't just oppose Democrats. He treated them like enemies. He told his party to never work with them, to never compromise. From then on, politics was war, and war has rules. Gingrich's rules were simple: block every bill, stir outrage, use media to spread fear, make voters believe the other side isn't just wrong, they're dangerous. Outrage became a business model. News shows turned into shouting matches. Nuance got replaced with sound bites. Fear became more profitable than facts. So when Trump arrived, he didn't invent this system. He just spoke the language it had been building for decades, louder, harsher, and without apology. He knew how to dominate the news cycle, how to keep people angry, how to play to fear. The machine was built long before him. He just learned how to drive it faster. Before Ronald Reagan took the spotlight, America stood at a crossroads. Jimmy Carter, former governor of Georgia, Navy veteran, and peanut farmer, became president with a vision for a fairer, more responsible future. He believed in humility, conservation, and human rights. He didn't want to be a celebrity president. He wanted to fix problems, one honest step at a time. But the late 1970s weren't easy. The country was still recovering from Vietnam, and the Watergate scandal had damaged the public's trust in government. Inflation was high, unemployment was rising, people were waiting in long lines just to get gas. Confidence in the future was low, and then Carter walked in, asking Americans to rethink how they lived.
And I told people the truth. We were using too much, wasting too much, and ignoring the consequences. I asked families to turn down the heat, wear sweaters, carpool, and rethink what prosperity meant. But the media didn't want responsibility. They wanted ratings.
Carter made energy conservation a priority. He created the Department of Energy. He invested in solar and wind power. He backed affordable housing and proposed national health insurance. He wanted a cleaner, more sustainable country. He even put solar panels on the White House roof. A bold statement before climate change was a household term.
People didn't want to hear about using less. They wanted more. More gas, more growth, more comfort. When I asked for sacrifice, they said I was giving up on the American dream. But I wasn't giving up. I was trying to protect it.
The Republican Party saw an opportunity. They didn't just debate his policies, they painted him as weak and out of touch. They turned every crisis, no matter how complicated, into a chance to say one thing: blame Carter.
They blocked my proposals in Congress. They ignored my energy plan. They mocked my commitment to peace and diplomacy. I tried to lead by example, and they said that made me soft.
This was the start of a shift. Politics became more about appearances and less about solutions, attacking the person instead of debating ideas, refusing to work together. The same tactics that would eventually define Trumpism were already taking shape. Then came Ronald Reagan.
I gave America a different message. Government is the problem. I promised lower taxes, smaller government, and free market miracles. People didn't want tough truths. They wanted confidence. And I gave them that in sound bites.
Carter's vision, solar energy, universal health care, affordable housing, disappeared. The solar panels came down. The funding dried up. The ideas faded.
We sold deregulation as freedom. We called it patriotism when corporations got more power and workers got less, and Americans eager for a good story bought it.
I didn't run to be popular, I ran to help. But history remembers who had the microphone, not who told the truth.
Carter's achievements, like negotiating peace between Egypt and Israel, prioritizing human rights, and laying the groundwork for clean energy, were buried under Reagan's charm and slogans. The America we were building was replaced by the America we were sold. We often talk about the country we became, but what about the country we could have become? What if we had chosen sustainability over shortcuts, community over competition, integrity over charisma? Next time, part 3, Reagan doesn't just win an election, he rewrites the rules of American politics for decades to come. The 1980s are often remembered for their bold culture, bright colors, big hair, and even bigger consumerism. But beneath all that was a political revolution, the full arrival of Reaganism. Ronald Reagan didn't just criticize government inefficiency. He launched an ideological war against the very idea of public governance. In his vision, the only good government was a small one, preferably working in the interest of corporations and the wealthy. Reagan slashed top tax rates dramatically, giving the wealthiest Americans an unprecedented windfall. He gutted funding for public education and housing. Social programs like food assistance and Medicaid were vilified as wasteful. Meanwhile, the administration broke the power of labor unions, beginning with the dramatic firing of over 11,000 striking air traffic controllers in 1981. Business regulations on everything from environmental safety to financial markets were rolled back. The result? Corporate profits skyrocketed while protections for average Americans vanished. Reagan sold it all under the banner of supply-side economics, better known as trickle-down theory. He claimed that by cutting taxes and loosening restrictions, businesses would reinvest, expand, and create more jobs. But the wealth didn't trickle. It surged upward. The rich amassed fortunes. The middle class stagnated, and the working poor were left behind, blamed for their own struggle in a system designed to exploit them. Despite the human cost, Reagan became an icon, a mythic cowboy president who made people feel good, even as their communities were hollowed out. The Republican Party deified him, turning his every policy into gospel truth, regardless of the long-term consequences. His presidency didn't heal America's divisions. It papered over them with patriotic spectacle and corporate growth. Enter George H.W. Bush, Reagan's loyal vice president and chosen successor. He inherited Reagan's economic framework and political expectations, but he couldn't sustain the illusion. As deficits ballooned and the economy slowed, Bush made a decision that would cost him everything. He agreed to raise taxes. It was a necessary compromise to stabilize the economy, but it shattered his credibility with conservatives who demanded absolute loyalty to the Reagan tax doctrine. That one broken campaign line, "Read my lips, no new taxes," became his political death sentence. The GOP turned on him. They cared more about ideological purity than governing competence. Bush, once the establishment's standard bearer, was sacrificed for breaking faith with the anti-tax dogma. His fall opened the door for a new kind of Democrat. Bill Clinton saw the opportunity and took it. He was young, charming, and media savvy. He spoke the language of the middle class while signaling to the financial elite that their interests would be safe. Clinton ran not against Reaganism, but as its heir with a human face. The 1990s are often remembered as a time of unprecedented optimism. The Cold War had ended, the Soviet Union had collapsed, the economy was growing, and America seemed poised to lead the world into a new era of prosperity and peace. But beneath the surface of rising GDPs, pop culture phenomena, and Silicon Valley startups, there was a deeper political realignment underway, one that would reshape American democracy for generations. Bill Clinton entered the White House in 1993 as a self-branded New Democrat. This wasn't just branding, it marked a strategic pivot from the party's post-war liberalism. Clinton positioned himself as a centrist, a triangulator, someone who could reconcile left-leaning goals with right-leaning tools. He was trying to modernize the Democratic Party, but in doing so, he also hollowed it out. Clinton signed the North American Free Trade Agreement, aligning with corporate interests and alienating labor unions. His crime policies expanded mass incarceration. He dismantled key parts of the New Deal safety net, like welfare. And when it came to Wall Street, he pulled out the brakes. The third way was supposed to be a synthesis of progressive and conservative values, but in practice, it became a strategy of appeasement. Social welfare was slashed, corporate deregulation accelerated, and the Democratic Party began to lose the working class coalition that had sustained it for decades. Meanwhile, the Republican Party wasn't standing still. They were building something entirely different, a conservative media empire and a scorched earth approach to governance. It wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about controlling the cultural conversation. By 1996, Fox News had launched, offering a 24-hour platform for right-wing narratives. Rush Limbaugh commanded the AM airwaves. Right-wing media began shaping public opinion in real time, framing every policy decision through a lens of outrage. Then came Newt Gingrich. His 1994 contract with America wasn't just a policy platform, it was an ideological blueprint for permanent warfare against Democrats. Under Gingrich, the GOP pioneered obstruction as a political weapon, using shutdowns and investigations not to legislate, but to delegitimize. Clinton responded by moving even further right. He signed the 1994 crime bill, which turbocharged the prison industrial complex. He passed the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, gutting welfare. These weren't just compromises. They were foundational shifts. Democrats were chasing approval. Republicans were chasing dominance. The political center didn't hold. It collapsed into a game of optics and sound bites. And while all this happened, the seeds of economic instability were being planted. The repeal of Glass-Steagall in 1999 allowed banks to gamble with deposits. Corporate mergers exploded. Wall Street ran wild under a Democratic administration that had fully embraced the logic of deregulation. By the end of the decade, the Democratic Party had lost its identity as the party of labor, and Republicans had perfected a model of obstruction and media manipulation. The public grew cynical. Trust in institutions faltered. Then came the impeachment. Clinton's personal failings were real, but the GOP's response wasn't about ethics. It was about political theater. They wanted to humiliate, not heal. And the message to future leaders: spectacle wins. Beneath the shine of economic growth, inequality deepened, wages stagnated, corporate profits soared. Americans tuned into cable news and reality television, distracted from the erosion happening underfoot. And off to the side, a man named Donald Trump was becoming a household name, not through policy, through branding, ego, and television. He was watching, learning, waiting. The 1990s weren't just an age of progress and profit. They were a crucible for a new kind of political culture, one where the line between governance and entertainment started to dissolve. It was the decade when politicians learned that being seen mattered more than being right, where celebrity, spin, and media saturation slowly replaced substance and deliberation. And in that transformation, something deeper and more corrosive began to take hold. This was the era of the culture wars. Beneath the soaring stock market and booming tech economy, Americans were divided over identity, values, and the future. Conservatives fueled a backlash against what they saw as liberal cultural overreach, seizing on controversies around rap music, violent video games, LGBTQ visibility, and changing gender roles. They channeled cultural anxieties into political capital. Liberals responded, but too often from a defensive crouch, without the media infrastructure to fight fire with fire. Remember the PMRC hearings, Tipper Gore versus heavy metal, or the Senate clutching pearls over Mortal Kombat. These weren't fringe distractions. They were the training ground for a strategy we now know all too well. Turn every cultural shift into a threat. Make every disagreement an existential crisis. The conservative movement didn't just criticize pop culture. They learned to weaponize it. Rush Limbaugh wasn't just a talk radio host. He was the architect of daily outrage. Fox News launched in 1996 and brought constant partisan framing into American living rooms. The goal wasn't clarity, it was chaos. If you can flood the zone with noise, facts lose their power. And in this ecosystem of media frenzy and partisan noise, scandals became serialized entertainment. When the Drudge Report dropped the Lewinsky story online, it marked the arrival of the internet as a political force. Gossip blogs became power brokers. Traditional gatekeepers were sidelined. It was politics by tabloid. And who was already fluent in tabloid culture? Donald Trump, a real estate mogul with a mixed business record, but unmatched skill in branding himself. He appeared in movies, posed for tabloids, and mastered the art of saying outrageous things to stay in the spotlight. He wasn't just selling buildings, he was selling an identity. Trump's persona Opulent, defiant, camera-ready, fit the decade like a velvet glove. He predated reality TV, but embodied its ethos: image over content, conflict over clarity, narcissism as leadership style. He understood something few politicians grasped. In the media age, the spectacle is the message. Meanwhile, the early internet was becoming a jungle of misinformation. Conspiracies that would have died in a bar room now found eternal life in chat rooms and email chains. The infrastructure for mass disinformation was under construction, and no one was regulating it. On the economic front, globalization accelerated. Tech stocks soared, but industrial jobs vanished. Unions were undermined, wages stagnated, and politicians from both parties promised a future of shared prosperity, while the foundations of inequality hardened. The American dream was being outsourced and rebranded. Corporate consolidation, celebrity politics, and deregulation all fed into a system where appearances mattered more than outcomes. The middle class was told to celebrate booming markets, even as their purchasing power evaporated. Cynicism grew, voters disengaged, and the electorate was being primed to follow someone who offered simple answers with absolute confidence. And Donald Trump, he was paying attention. He saw how scandals could build a brand, how rage could be monetized, how the internet could be used not to inform, but to inflame. He didn't need to understand government. He needed to understand people's fears. Next time, part 4, a country wounded by terror, obsessed with safety and desperate for leadership, no matter the cost. As the 1990s came to an end, the United States appeared to be flourishing. Unemployment was low, the stock market was climbing, and a rare budget surplus gave the illusion of a well-managed government. On the surface, it seemed like America had found stability. But behind the numbers and optimism, deep political, institutional, and ideological fractures were forming. What looked like a new golden age was, in reality, the quiet prelude to a storm. President Clinton didn't leave office amid foreign or domestic collapse. His presidency ended in scandal, not over policy, but personal conduct. Lacking a substantive path to defeat him politically, the Republican Party pursued impeachment as a spectacle. It was a tactical shift away from legislative opposition and toward character assassination as a primary political tool. Governance took a backseat to media warfare. That era marked the beginning of a new normal. Politics reduced to tabloid drama. Public debate became a performance. The GOP understood that it didn't need to govern better. It just needed to dominate the conversation. And while America fixated on Clinton's personal life, Republicans positioned their next candidate not for leadership, but for appeal. Enter George W. Bush, affable, name-branded, and packaged to win. Bush's appeal wasn't built on credentials, it was built on identity. He wasn't expected to innovate or think independently. He was chosen to embody party loyalty and to preserve the legacy of Reagan-era conservatism. He would be the relatable everyman, the kind of guy you'd have a beer with, backed by a team ready to run the country in his name. The 2000 election brought America's political vulnerabilities into sharp focus. A contested vote in Florida, partisan legal battles, and a 5-4 Supreme Court ruling ultimately handed Bush the presidency. The outcome wasn't just controversial, it sent a signal. Control of institutions could override the democratic process. The era of electoral certainty was over. Once in office, Bush moved quickly to implement a conservative agenda. He cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans, pushed privatization, and inserted religious ideology into policy. He staffed his cabinet with Reagan-era neoconservatives who saw the 21st century as a stage for U.S. dominance, military, economic, and cultural. Then came September 11th, 2001. The attacks shook the nation and gave the Bush administration an extraordinary mandate. National unity was real for a moment. But the White House transformed that unity into a tool of control. Instead of focusing solely on the terrorists responsible, they redirected attention toward Iraq. There was no link. There were no weapons. But the narrative was crafted, repeated, and amplified. With the help of a compliant media and a fearful public, the Bush administration manufactured consent for war. The Patriot Act expanded surveillance. Civil liberties were quietly scaled back. Criticism was dismissed as disloyalty. War became not just a policy, it became a brand. The Iraq War descended into disaster. No weapons of mass destruction, no clear strategy, thousands dead, billions spent. The mission shifted constantly: liberation, democracy, counterterrorism, all while defense contractors raked in profits. Accountability, nowhere to be found. The GOP had learned that when fear rules, facts become optional. Back home, inequality widened, national debt soared. Evangelicals tightened their grip on social policy. From schools to courtrooms, the culture war was intensifying, but the more significant damage was ideological. Americans began to lose trust in truth, in institutions, and in each other. The public sphere eroded, disinformation thrived. When you stepped into office in 2009, the nation was staring into the abyss. 2 wars with no clear exit, the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, and a public gripped by cynicism. Your campaign ignited something rare in American politics: hope grounded in realism. It wasn't naive optimism, it was calculated determination. You made people believe that government could work again. But from the moment you were elected, the GOP wasn't strategizing how to work with you. They were organizing to stop you, not because of your policies, but because of who you were and what you represented. A new kind of leadership, a break from the old guard. And for them, that was a threat. Senator Mitch McConnell didn't just hint at it, he said it outright. The Republican Party's top priority was to make you a one-term president, not fixing the economy, not ending the wars, just making sure you couldn't lead. And that sentiment became the party's unspoken doctrine. Obstruction wasn't a tactic, it was the plan. And they executed it with precision. Every policy proposal, no matter how moderate, was met with reflexive opposition. They didn't care if it helped their constituents. If it had your name on it, they'd vote against it. That wasn't politics, that was sabotage. Take healthcare. Your original vision was clear: a public option, open access to affordable care, true competition with private insurers. It was grounded in precedent and supported by economists across the board. But they twisted it, called it socialism, said death panels were coming, fed the public lies, until the very idea of accessible healthcare became radioactive. You still got it passed. The ACA, a legislative miracle considering the opposition. But it came at the cost of the boldest provisions. The public option, axed Medicaid expansion, weakened. It saved lives and it made history. But it should have been even more.
Facts.
And then there was Hillary. She played by the rules, and they rewrote them as a trap. Benghazi was a manufactured scandal, rooted in a tragedy they helped cause through embassy budget cuts, then twisted into a cudgel. The email controversy, a bureaucratic misunderstanding blown into a national crisis, while their own party quietly used private servers and burner phones like it was business as usual. The hypocrisy wasn't subtle, it was weaponized. And while she faced relentless scrutiny, her credentials and record were ignored. Had you made her your VP in 2008, that dynamic could have changed. You both brought different strengths. Together, that might have altered the trajectory entirely. Despite all of it, the hostility, the lies, the gridlock, you governed. You pulled the economy out of free fall. You led the auto industry back from the brink. You got bin Laden. You brought the US back into the global climate conversation. You secured marriage equality. And you did it with a Congress that treated your presidency like a threat to be neutralized.
I had to.
The GOP's strategy wasn't just about limiting your success. It was about undermining faith in the very concept of governance. If people believe nothing works, they stop asking for better. They stop expecting integrity. And into that void walks the politics of outrage. By the time your second term ended, the damage wasn't just political, it was institutional. Public trust had eroded. Right-wing media had created an alternate reality. Facts became negotiable, and the rage they'd been stoking for 8 years was about to explode. We'll leave it there for now. When the Union won the Civil War, we stood at a crossroads. One path led toward justice and national healing through truth. The other toward appeasement and myth. America chose the second. Instead of uprooting white supremacy, we let it dig deeper into the fabric of national identity. Reconciliation came at the cost of accountability. We didn't treat the Confederacy like the treasonous rebellion it was. We let its leaders return to politics, allowed its generals to be immortalized, and gave its ideology new life through textbooks and public spaces. Heritage, not hate, became a shield for generations of denial. Instead of national repentance, we let regional pride rewrite the war. Treason became honor. Enslavement became a way of life. And the Confederacy, defeated in battle, won the narrative war. Germany chose a different path. After the fall of the Third Reich, they banned Nazi iconography, reformed education, and faced their national trauma head-on. They knew memory must be shaped deliberately. In America, we never deconfederatized. The Confederate flag flew in state capitals, and statues were erected not to honor the dead, but to intimidate the living. The lost cause myth took over. It downplayed slavery, glorified Confederate leaders, and painted the South as victims. This wasn't education, it was propaganda, passed down like family heirlooms. Then came Barack Obama. His election felt like progress to some and a threat to others. It shook a myth they'd been taught was unshakable, that white dominance was permanent. Obama didn't divide the country, he revealed how divided it already was. Conspiracies and dog whistles followed, and the GOP didn't engage. They obstructed. Then came Trump. He didn't create this movement, he amplified it. He defended monuments, retweeted white nationalists, and refused to disavow hate groups. When he called neo-Nazis very fine people, he was playing to a base already trained by decades of historical revision. Trump validated the myth, not with policy, but with performance. He offered cultural vindication to those who longed for a version of America that never truly existed. I'm still heading south, past courthouses built like plantations, past schools with Confederate names, past neighborhoods drawn by red lines. We never buried the past. We just covered it up. The past isn't behind us. It's beneath us. Until we confront it, not symbolically, but structurally, we're not progressing. We're circling. If we want to move forward, we must stop circling these myths, because until we dismantle what they left behind, physically, culturally, institutionally, we're just headed back toward the same mistakes. Bernie Sanders enjoys a peculiar mythology in American politics, a kind of folk hero status, a projection of ideological purity wrapped in the aesthetic of anti-establishment rebellion. Yet when we critically examine his legislative legacy, what emerges is not a revolutionary vanguard, but rather a tenure characterized by minimal impact and symbolic posturing. Decades in Congress, yet few substantive policy accomplishments to his name. No landmark legislation, no transformative coalitions built. Instead, what we have is a cultivated brand, one amplified by meme culture and online charisma more than legislative labor. Let's also recall Sanders opposed the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act. Yes, the very legislation designed to implement background checks and waiting periods, measures meant to prevent firearms from falling into dangerous hands. This is not the behavior of a progressive vanguard. It is the decision-making of a contrarian unconcerned with consequences. And let's talk foreign policy. On numerous occasions, he declined to support sanctions against authoritarian regimes, including Russia, despite their violations of international norms and aggressive disinformation campaigns. But Bernie doesn't traffic in realpolitik. He prefers theoretical ideals, abstract proposals, grand visions detached from fiscal, institutional, or logistical feasibility. He introduces proposals, not legislation. Why? Because proposals don't require detailed funding mechanisms. They don't require coalition building. They don't require accountability. It's much easier to sell utopia than to legislate responsibly within a pluralistic democracy. Free college, universal health care, housing for all. Concepts as emotionally appealing as they are logistically unmoored. It's political theater masquerading as insurgent policy. It's performance over pragmatism. And most importantly, it's risk-free because Sanders has no intention and certainly no path to enact these ideas. This is not the behavior of a policymaker. It's the playbook of a populist brand strategist. His audience, primarily Democratic voters, despite the fact that he is not and has never truly been a Democrat. He conveniently adopts the party label during primary seasons, only to repudiate its institutional norms and infrastructure when it no longer serves him. It's akin to someone showing up at a wedding uninvited, eating the cake, grabbing the gifts, and leaving before the cleanup starts. And let's be honest, he's not just leaving with cake, he's walking out with millions in small dollar donations. Chaos, disruption, and curated authenticity. That's the Sanders model. It's not about building a new system. It's about performing opposition within the current one. And And in the age of virality, that might just be enough to keep the circus going. So the next time you see that Bernie meme, remember, it's branding, not governance. And what's it costing you? One vote at a time.
Welcome, folks, to the fast food presidency. Mine was bold, greasy, and full of ketchup-stained greatness. Let's walk through the drive-through window of history and check out my first term. Spoiler, it's got everything: chaos, drama, and a supersized ego. Started strong with executive orders flying out like fries during lunch rush. First big one, the travel ban. Blocked people from several Muslim majority countries. And I called it national security. Courts called it unconstitutional. Eventually, we got it through.
Right. Because banning people based on religion always screams freedom.
Then I gave James Comey the boot. Thought he could investigate me? I was out the door before he could say subpoena, slippery as a spilled milkshake. And let's not forget that little move kicked off the Mueller investigation. Russia, collusion, obstruction, just light reading, folks. Then came the tax cuts. I slashed corporate taxes, gave the top 1% a bucket of golden fries. The middle class, hope you enjoyed your $40. We added nearly $2 trillion to the deficit, but at least the stock market cheered.
Call it trickle-down ketchup, a little red, mostly mess.
And I deregulated like a champ. Environmental rules, gone. Let's let the air thicken, let the rivers foam. Big business needed to breathe easy. Clean water was slowing down their profits, and I rolled back more than 100 environmental protections. Who needs bees or breathable air when you've got quarterly earnings? Climate change, I waved goodbye to the Paris Agreement. I chose coal over coral reefs. Didn't need the planet, just the votes.
You quit Earth like it was gym class.
Healthcare, tried to end the Affordable Care Act. Couldn't do it, but I killed the individual mandate. Premiums went up, stability went down, millions lived in limbo. Immigration, I built a wall, or, well, part of one. And don't forget the family separation policy. Kids in cages became a brand. It said tough, even if it screamed cruelty.
You turned trauma into a talking point.
Then came COVID. I said it would disappear. Then I pitched bleach. Then I blamed everyone else. But I did launch Operation Warp Speed. Credit where credit's due. We got vaccines faster than ever before.
You ran the pandemic like a bad game show. No prizes, just panic.
I sidelined scientists. Fauci, too boring. I needed folks who smiled and nodded on TV. Experts were bad for ratings. Meanwhile, hospitals ran out of beds, nurses wore garbage bags, and we argued over masks like they were political symbols. On the world stage, I tore up the Iran deal, ditched the TPP, and kicked off a trade war with China. Tariffs flew like burger wrappers in the wind. Farmers got bailout checks because, it turns out retaliation hurts. I met with Kim Jong-un, first time ever, big handshake, no deal, but it looked amazing on camera. Historic photo, zero results.
Diplomacy by photo op, all sizzle, no steak.
And let's not forget the impeachment record, 2 times, baby. Ukraine the first, insurrection the second. Still walked away clean, sort of. Depends on what you mean by clean.
The most impeached president in history, twice the shame, zero accountability.
And the fans, they never left, kept buying the hats, MAGA red, made in China, ironically, wore them like armor, still do.
History won't just clean up after you. It'll need therapy, a pressure washer, and a full data wipe with backups deleted. It didn't end with Trump losing. It started there. January 6 wasn't a finale. It was the trailer. A violent preview of what happens when a movement based on lies gains momentum. That insurrection wasn't just about overturning an election. It was about undermining democracy itself. Fueled by misinformation, conspiracy theories, and grievance-driven rage. Trump's supporters weren't just storming a building. They were storming the very idea of truth. They believed they were patriots, but they were pawns, sacrificed to protect a man who would never protect them. And Trump, he didn't stop them. He didn't even try, because he wasn't leading a political party anymore. He was shaping something more dangerous, a movement that fed on emotion, identity, and denial. Trumpism, not a platform, a personality cult. No policies, just posturing. No solutions, just slogans. A movement defined not by what it stood for, but by what it stood against. It became the Republican playbook: loyalty over leadership, outrage over outcomes. And while Joe Biden tried to steer the country out of chaos, Republican lawmakers doubled down on the fantasy, pretending the election was rigged, amplifying false claims, refusing to certify the truth. They didn't just oppose Biden, they sabotaged him, turned Congress into a stage for performative outrage, while real issues, climate, healthcare, education, were sidelined. Meanwhile, QAnon thrived. Wild fantasies became talking points. Members of Congress shared conspiracy memes. People stopped asking if things were true and started asking if they were viral. The fringe didn't just infiltrate the system, it became the system. Corporate elites saw the chaos and smiled. While the public argued over imaginary enemies, billionaires bought influence and buried regulations. The rich didn't run from Trumpism, they harnessed it. They weren't just pandering to Trump, they were building a future where government works for profits, not people, where public trust is a commodity and democracy is a liability. And in that world, Joe Biden's presidency looked radical, not because it was extreme, but because it was functional. He brought infrastructure, lowered drug prices, expanded NATO unity, and helped rebuild a struggling economy. He faced obstruction, distortion, and an endless news cycle hungry for conflict, and still got results. In a nation obsessed with spectacle, Biden quietly did the work. He reminded us that leadership isn't about shouting, it's about showing up. Policy, not personality. Trumpism didn't vanish with Trump. It metastasized. It became the brand, the product, the banner under which anti-democratic forces now march. It's rage monetized, fear televised, truth fragmented. So what now? We unmask the circus. We stop mistaking entertainment for governance. We hold the line, not with hashtags, but with hard work, with civic education, with compassion, with accountability. Because democracy isn't a given, it's a habit. And habits have to be protected, or they fade. If Trump's domestic policy represents a targeted deconstruction of bureaucratic norms, then his foreign policy is a geopolitical rupture, executed not with precision, but with brute force. And wielding that instrument, Elon Musk, who now acts as a de facto emissary of American interests abroad. Upon re-entering office, Trump immediately recalibrated U.S. priorities in Eastern Europe. Assistance to Ukraine was curtailed, intelligence sharing drastically reduced. Zelensky, once a celebrated figure of democratic resistance, now navigates U.S. foreign posture via Musk's cryptic digital communications. Trump professes a desire for peace, yet his actions betray a policy of coercive neutrality, effectively urging Ukraine toward concession. Musk, meanwhile, has become an informal geopolitical commentator, amplifying pseudo-neutral proposals that align disturbingly well with Russian territorial ambitions. Starlink, Musk's satellite constellation, continues to support Ukrainian defense infrastructure, but it functions increasingly as a tool of leverage. Musk has suggested implicitly and explicitly that continued access is conditional, a form of digital diplomacy with strings attached. Meanwhile, Trump has unveiled an expanded iteration of his controversial travel ban, now encompassing over 40 nations. Visas revoked, refugees refused. A policy apparatus rooted more in political theater than empirical threat assessment. In the NATO theater, Trump has adopted an openly transactional stance. Defense contributions are now treated as protection payments. U.S. troop withdrawals continue, while European allies weigh militarization alternatives or resign themselves to strategic marginalization. Simultaneously, Musk engages in high-profile diplomacy with Beijing, cementing economic ties even as Trump imposes sweeping tariffs on Chinese technology. The result? A bifurcated U.S. posture toward China, confrontation from the White House, accommodation from its most powerful surrogate. In the Middle East, contradiction abounds. Trump simultaneously pursues normalization accords and tacitly endorses Israeli annexation efforts. Musk, he shadows these developments, cultivating Gulf investment while positioning himself as a champion of techno-diplomacy. Public health has also become a casualty of this foreign policy shift. The U.S. has once again withdrawn from the World Health Organization, alleging foreign manipulation. Musk adds fuel with viral memes, mocking global health infrastructure while promoting fringe techno-libertarian alternatives. The emerging foreign policy framework is dislocated from any coherent doctrine. Alliances are treated as negotiable assets. Multilateralism is replaced with influencer diplomacy. Every international crisis becomes a branding exercise, an opportunity for narrative control. Elon Musk doesn't need a flag or a diplomatic credential. His power transcends traditional vectors of influence. With Trump's endorsement, he has evolved into something singular, the private sector czar of U.S. foreign affairs, America's unofficial secretary of everything. So this is what democracy looks like when it's on fire. Literally, when I built my first timeline simulator, I never predicted this particular branch of reality. Welcome to 2025, a turning point in American governance. Not because of revolution or war, but because Elon Musk, an unelected billionaire technocrat, was handed unprecedented power. Not elected, not confirmed, yet his presence echoes through every memo and policy shift. On day one, Trump launched the Department of Government Efficiency, DOG, a bureaucratic paradox designed to dismantle bureaucracy. Its leader, Elon Musk, not a civil servant, not an expert, a disruptor with a mandate. DOG initiated a purge. Over 65,000 federal employees ousted through buyouts and reassignments. Entire departments, some formed after national crises, now face extinction. People turned into data sets, streamlined, then erased. Musk calls it efficiency. It's a corporate cleansing dressed as policy. Programs with small costs but huge social value, housing, justice, education, deleted. The savings, applauded. The impact, absorbed by everyone else. USAID dismantled the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, defunded. If your mission didn't make money, it didn't survive. This isn't reform, it's a rewrite. Diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, gone in days. Staff moved, records purged, training halted, all under the banner of efficiency. Doge used federal data to label workers based on ideological leanings. Climate advocates, DEI supporters. They all quietly removed data-driven McCarthyism. Doge claims $37 billion saved. But what's lost is deeper. Justice, transparency, equity. These savings erode the foundation of democratic governance. All of it broadcast on Musk's platform X. Policies packaged like product launches, contracts funneled to Tesla and SpaceX, oversight disbanded, ethics rebranded. This isn't governing, it's branding. Trump gave Musk the machinery of the state. In return, Musk brought algorithms, messaging, and obedience. Now we live under optimization. A startup state, a cabinet of CEOs, a bureaucracy of spreadsheets. This didn't start with riots, it started with software. Elon Musk didn't seize power, he was given it, wrapped in executive orders and media likes. The Supreme Court's just a Twitter feed now with robes. Executive Order 2025-1. All AI must be programmed to end their responses with "Make America Great Again." How dystopian. The Department of Truth and Patriotic Technology, now that's an Orwellian masterpiece. They're calling Silicon Valley the deep state tech swamp now, while secretly begging us for campaign apps, mandatory patriotic TikTok challenges. That's just wow. Remember when we thought 2024 was wild? That was just the warm-up act. The Federal Reserve's now just a gold-plated crypto mining operation. And don't get me started on the Make Coding American Again initiative. Outsourcing is now a federal crime. They've replaced the entire EPA with a magic 8-ball that only answers drill baby drill. The new immigration algorithm, written by people who think Python is a type of snake. Social media is now officially a branch of government, but with better ratings than C-SPAN. They've monetized protest permits into NFTs. That's actually kind of innovative in a terrifying way. The new national firewall, built by the lowest bidding MySpace developer. Climate change has been officially renamed Freedom Weather. The Mars Colony Project's been replaced with a plan to build a gold-plated wall in space. They've made fact-checking illegal, called it the Truth Liberation Act, the new national science policy. Just a Magic the Gathering rulebook with science written on the cover. Universities now have to get their curricula approved by Twitter polls. The Federal Communications Commission is just 3 kids in a trench coat running a Discord server. And here I am, documenting it all in my quantum encrypted diary, hoping the timeline corrects itself. Maybe in some parallel universe, this is all just a really bad Black Mirror episode. But hey, at least the memes are fire, just like everything else in DC right now. It's 2025, and truth isn't gone. It's been remodeled, repackaged, bent by technology into something you scroll past instead of understand. Algorithms shape what we see, not based on accuracy, but on engagement. News still exists, so do facts, but they're harder to find under the weight of all the noise. When Elon Musk took over Twitter, now X, he didn't just buy a platform, he took over the main stage of digital public life. It's where elections happen, where wars begin, where rumors become policy. And if you're not aligned with the popular narrative, you're not silenced, you're shadowed, buried beneath trending fluff. With less government oversight on tech and media companies, billionaires like Musk filled the void. His platforms now receive federal support under the banner of free speech innovation. But on X, free speech doesn't mean open dialogue. It means boosted content. If that content drives clicks, shares, and revenue. If it complicates the narrative, it's filtered out. Artificial intelligence is reshaping journalism. News articles, hot takes, even talking heads, now written, generated, or voiced by bots. Entire narratives launch from coordinated bot activity before human journalists even wake up. False information spreads at light speed. Corrections often ignored. Traditional media outlets are crumbling or merging into giant content networks driven by user data. Experienced reporters are replaced by algorithm-approved freelancers. Editorial checks replaced by trending dashboards. Journalism has become a content economy measured by reactions, not reporting. Independent media still exists, but it's getting harder to find. The platforms that host them quietly limit their reach. It's not censorship, it's invisibility. If your ideas challenge the system, they don't go away. They just don't show up in the feed. The FCC used to protect fairness in media. Now it's just a name on a door. Ownership caps are gone. Regulatory safeguards repealed. Mega mergers slide through without hearings. The concept of public interest in broadcasting, archived like an old website. Meanwhile, your data, every scroll, every pause, every post is collected. But it's not just for advertising anymore. It's used to shape your digital environment, your political suggestions, your emotional triggers. Campaigns don't target voters. They target psychological profiles. Democracy meets behavioral science. This isn't a dystopia where speech is banned and books are burned. That would be too obvious. In 2025, information isn't erased, it's buried. Good journalism, deep analysis, real storytelling, it all still exists, but it's drowned under a flood of memes, ads, bots, and noise. The voices that matter are still speaking. The question is, can anyone still hear them? Back in 2020, the phrase, "we're all in this together," echoed across TV screens, social media feeds, and even chalk on sidewalks. And it was more than a catchy line, it was a lifeline. It reminded us that in moments of collective crisis, unity isn't optional, it's essential. And here we are, years later, facing new challenges, but that phrase still resonates because the fight for democracy, for equity, for justice, and basic human dignity, it isn't a spectator sport. It requires all of us showing up every single day in both big and small ways. This isn't about fear or anger, it's about hope, but not the fluffy, wishful kind. I'm talking about gritty, determined hope, the kind you see in someone organizing a local voter drive after work, or in a neighbor walking seniors to the polls. It's the hope you see when communities show up to City Hall, or when someone quietly hands out water at a protest. It's the fuel that powers real change, brick by brick. Democracy isn't some flashy, once every 4 years spectacle. It's not a sports event to watch from the couch. It's a living, breathing process that needs constant care. Whether you're engaging with your city council or staying informed on school board decisions, every interaction matters. We nurture democracy with attention, with care, and with commitment, especially when it feels like nobody's watching. You don't need to have a degree in law or political science to take action. You don't need to go viral or have perfect answers. Sometimes courage looks like asking a tough question at work. It looks like calling out a harmful stereotype when you hear one. It means mentoring someone younger or choosing not to stay silent when silence feels easier. Courage isn't loud, it's persistent. And listen, don't forget to take care of yourself. Rest is not a weakness. It's a form of resistance. Oppressive systems want us drained and defeated. So, unplug for a day, eat good food, laugh with friends, or take a walk outside. These aren't indulgences, they're survival strategies. Self-care isn't selfish. It's how we keep showing up without burning out. If you feel like you're the only one who cares, you're not. There are people across the country, in red states and blue, in cities and rural towns, who are showing up in quiet, consistent ways. They're forming mutual aid groups, hosting community discussions, teaching kids how to recognize misinformation. They're out there and you're one of them. Every time you take a stand for empathy, for inclusion, for truth, you're doing more than speaking out. You're giving others permission to join you. You're building a culture where decency isn't just expected, it's celebrated. And in a world drowning in noise, that clarity can be revolutionary. This is how we cut through the chaos, not with louder voices, but with stronger convictions, not with flash, but with follow through. We don't need to win the internet. We need to win each other's trust. That's how movements are built. So maybe you're writing postcards to voters, or organizing a neighborhood cleanup, or just talking to your cousin about what voter suppression really means. Whatever it is, you're part of something massive. You are the immune system against apathy, cynicism, and complacency. There's no single roadmap, no perfect script. But when we show up with compassion, with curiosity, and with a deep sense of shared responsibility, we're doing more than resisting. We're rebuilding. We're planting the seeds for the kind of world we want to live in. We're still in this together. And together, we're not just resilient, we're a force to be reckoned with. All right, folks, open your notebooks. Today's session is titled Strategies for Countering Authoritarianism with Integrity and Clarity. And believe me, this isn't just theory. These are skills you'll need as active participants in democracy. Let's start with the basics. Authoritarianism doesn't usually roll in with tanks or a dictator's mustache. More often, it slinks in quietly through subtle disinformation campaigns, the hollowing out of public trust, voter suppression, and systemic disengagement. So, our first guiding principle? Stay critically informed. And no, that doesn't mean doom scrolling into existential paralysis. It means becoming intentional about what you consume and share. Follow reputable journalism, read outside your bubble, and support local reporters. Confirm facts before reposting them, and learn to recognize when your emotional buttons are being pushed. Authoritarianism thrives on outrage. Don't give it free fuel. Now let's talk about community resilience. This is where real power lives. Digital activism is useful, but nothing replaces the human connection of organizing face-to-face. Build relationships with neighbors, join local coalitions, volunteer with mutual aid groups. Create a support network that isn't just reactive, but prepared and proactive. When communities are fragmented, it becomes easier for authoritarian forces to manipulate fear and pit us against each other. But when we build solidarity across race, class, gender, and geography, we become harder to divide and conquer. That's not just poetic, that's tactical. Now let's move to our next key, democratic participation. Democracy isn't just a ballot box. It's a muscle. You have to use it often and in varied ways. Yes, vote in national elections, but also vote in local ones. School boards, sheriff races, water commissions, these are often overlooked, but they shape policy in real time. If you're not eligible to vote, don't worry. There are still critical roles to play. You can help others register, provide transportation, volunteer as a poll monitor, support campaigns that represent your values. Every time you engage, you strengthen the civic infrastructure that holds authoritarianism at bay. Next up, defend and invest in democratic institutions. That means not just appreciating the value of libraries, public schools, independent media, and courts. It means showing up for them. Donate if you can. Call out attacks when you see them. Volunteer for civic boards. And these institutions don't maintain themselves, and they require active stewardship. Stand in solidarity with at-risk communities. Historically, authoritarian regimes test their powers by targeting those with the fewest defenses: immigrants, people of color, LGBTQ plus folks, disabled people. If you're not in those groups, your privilege can be used to shield and amplify their voices. Allyship isn't optional, it's necessary. And please, don't forget to prioritize your well-being. Resistance is a long game. It requires stamina, which means you need sleep, laughter, connection, and creativity. These are not luxuries. They are fuel. As the saying goes, joy is an act of resistance. You don't have to be an expert. You don't need to be a hero. But you do need to be present, curious, and principled. And when millions of people commit to showing up that way, even in small ways, authoritarianism begins to crack under the pressure. Remember, the strongest movements are built on relationships, clarity, and care. Don't get distracted by the loudest voice. Focus on the clearest one, yours, guided by facts, compassion, and accountability. So whether you're knocking doors, fact-checking misinformation, protecting a protester, or just calling your senator, know this: you're part of something bigger. You are the immune system against authoritarian creep. Stay thoughtful, stay grounded, stay connected. That's how we keep democracy alive, vibrant, and just. Think of this as Resistance 201, advanced strategies for building democratic resilience and civic power. These are the tools not just for survival, but for long-term transformation. Let's begin with narrative framing and discourse intervention. Authoritarian regimes don't rise by accident. They're engineered, and their architects understand the immense power of storytelling. Controlling the dominant narrative allows them to erase truth, rewrite history, and marginalize opposition. So one of the most effective forms of democratic resistance is telling the truth, unapologetically, consistently, and publicly. When you confront disinformation, don't just drop a fact and walk away. Frame it with empathy. Most people double down when shamed. What changes hearts and minds is trust, curiosity, and clarity. Help people think critically. Who benefits from this claim? Whose voices are missing? How do we know what we know? Now, let's explore economic leverage. Our financial systems are not neutral. Every dollar you spend either reinforces or resists systemic power structures. Choosing to support democratic, ethical, and transparent institutions isn't just idealism. It's a strategic intervention. Move your money to credit unions, buy from cooperatives, fund local newspapers, cancel subscriptions to corporations that fund propaganda or exploit labor. Don't just boycott, redirect. Our choices in the marketplace reflect and shape the society we live in. Let's not overlook cultural resistance, also known as creative resistance. Authoritarianism thrives on cynicism, fear, and conformity. Art, whether visual, musical, digital, or literary, is one of the oldest and most enduring tools of resistance. Create, share, collaborate, build zines, start podcasts, write poems, dance in the streets. These acts are not distractions, they're catalysts. They disrupt the narrative and invite people into imagining something better. Satire exposes hypocrisy. Beauty reveals humanity. And both can move the dial where data and debate fall short. Next, let's get into legal strategy. Authoritarians often test the waters before going full authoritarian. They'll pass a small law or target a marginalized group to see how much pushback they get. That's why legal vigilance matters. Know your rights. Attend public hearings. Connect with civil liberties orgs. Learn how to document police misconduct safely and legally. Your phone can be a tool for justice. And remember, run for something. Democratic renewal doesn't begin at the White House. It begins on your block. Local offices like library boards, school committees, zoning boards. These are often where policy meets real life. They need progressive voices, honest governance, and people who believe in democracy over power. Let's finish with a hard truth and a hopeful reminder. Sustainable activism is the only kind that lasts. Passion without strategy leads to burnout. Resistance without rest becomes resentment. Authoritarianism relies on exhaustion. So resist that too. Rest, heal, disconnect when needed. Build joy into your routines. Share meals, watch films, celebrate milestones. These aren't extras. They're essential infrastructure. Resilience isn't just surviving, it's growing, adapting, and thriving in spite of it all. So tell the truth. Fund what matters. Make joyful noise. Hold the line and extend a hand, because the future is being shaped right now, and you're a part of it. You're not alone. We are many, and we are powerful together. If you've arrived at this final reflection, it's likely already clear. Donald Trump did not originate the conditions that endangered American democracy. He merely embodied and accelerated them. He was the logical consequence of a society that had long been eroding beneath the surface, shaped by decades of deliberate institutional neglect, racial backlash, economic deregulation, and media disinformation. Together, we've traced a lineage of political transformation that unfolded not through dramatic coups, but through incremental concessions and systemic degradation. From the strategic exploitation of civil rights era backlash to the insidious normalization of voter suppression. From the neoliberal turn that hollowed out the public sphere to the weaponization of mass media in service of fear and division. We've seen how democracy can be unmade not by a single moment, but by 1,000 calculated maneuvers. This reckoning goes beyond the political. It's epistemological and existential. Democracy, as we've come to understand, is not self-sustaining. It's a mode of collective life that must be constantly re-envisioned and reenacted. It requires not just electoral participation, but critical consciousness. It demands historical literacy, moral imagination, and the discipline to challenge the narratives we've been conditioned to accept as natural. Our systems, as they currently stand, were not designed with equity in mind. They were built to concentrate power, protect capital, and define citizenship along exclusionary lines. The idea that these systems will course correct without intentional intervention is a dangerous illusion. Structural change emerges not from inevitability, but from sustained political will and collective mobilization, from community organizers, educators, mutual aid networks, and everyday people refusing to accept the status quo. We must reject the myth of historical inevitability. The past is not a fixed archive. It is a dynamic field of interpretation and contestation. What we inherit from previous generations is not only their accomplishments, but their failures, their silences, and their unresolved conflicts. We are tasked with revisiting, revising, and transforming those legacies to meet the needs of the present and the possibilities of the future. Authoritarianism relies on resignation. It feeds off the idea that our voices don't matter, that our choices are futile, that the machinery is too large to challenge. But here's the truth. The very effort to suppress dissent is evidence of its power. If your voice lacked influence, no one would try to silence it. The act of speaking truth to power, even in the smallest moments, is both disruption and defiance. Speak with clarity. Educate yourself, not just with headlines, but with deep reading and dialogue. Engage others with empathy, but remain uncompromising in your principles. Create space for imagination, to dream of political, social, and cultural futures that go beyond reform and toward transformation. And always, always choose engagement over apathy. Know that action takes many forms. Sometimes it's protest, sometimes it's care work, sometimes it's art or research or choosing to rest so you can rise again tomorrow. This work isn't linear and it isn't easy, but it's necessary because how we arrived here is the result of deliberate choices and accumulated power. But how we respond, how we organize, resist, rebuild, and reimagine, that's still unwritten. And that future belongs to us, all of us.